Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, we get to continue with our Longevity for Investors mini-series, along with my co-host, Greg Bailey. If you don't know Dr. Greg Bailey from previous episodes, you should really go back and listen to the ones where I actually interview him. Just quickly, he's currently executive chairman at Juvenescence, which is a platform company working on a lot of preventative medicines and longevity. Previous exits in the biotech world include a top migraine drug called Nurtec for $11.6 billion and top prostate cancer drug for $14.3 billion to Pfizer. I'm super lucky to have him as a co-host on this series. And he was very excited to have our guest on this week. And so I got excited. We've got Brianna Stubbs. Brianna, I'm super excited to talk about so many things today. But can I give just a quick background as I see it, and then you tell me the highlights that I missed? Does that work?
Sure, go ahead. It always makes me feel good to hear other people introduce me. So Why don't you go ahead?
So Brianna's an actual world champion rower for Great Britain. She can talk about the multiple series of different events she's won there. Also, like a world-class level triathlete and competed in the World Championships in Kona, Hawaii. She is originally went to school to become a doctor and got sidetracked into becoming a PhD scientist, and is literally one of the world's top experts on ketones and ketone esters and some of the ways that they interact with our bodies. Has been a part of multiple products that have come out over the years, and is currently at what I call the Harvard of longevity. It's called the Buck Institute out in California, and we're going to have her explain a little bit about what that is. Brianna, I missed so many things. What are a couple of the highlights that I missed?
I guess the fun one that people often mention is that at age 12, I was the youngest person to ever row across the English Channel. That's a fun story that I always like to share. But other than that, no, I think you covered all the highlights, and I'm happy to talk more about all of the different twists and turns I've taken as I've ended up here at the Buck.
Well, can we start with this? Can you start with explaining just really how great the Buck is and why people have so much respect for it? And then I'm going to let Greg take the next 2 or 3 questions after that.
Sure. So the Buck Institute is just north of San Francisco, which I just think geographically it's kind of perfect because there's just all of this. There's a real entrepreneurial and innovative spirit just in the whole Bay Area. And the Buck was founded, I think, it's an anniversary of ours this year. I feel like it might be our 20th anniversary this year. So it's somewhere between 15 to 20 years old. And it was the first freestanding not-for-profit institute that was focused purely on the biology of aging. So this was back when aging wasn't cool. I feel like right now everyone's thinking about how to live healthier and how to live longer. But when the Buck was founded, this was kind of an outlandish idea that we might be able to change the fundamental biology of aging. And so the group of scientists, some of the founding scientists are still here at the Buck. And the group of scientists that founded it were really groundbreaking at that time. So really now we have about 20 principal investigators. Everyone's focused on aging, but different systems of the body, which is quite unusual for typically in a university, you'd have the cardiovascular department or the neurology department, and everyone would be studying sort of siloed by system. But here we have multiple systems of the body being studied in one place, all through the lens of aging. So it's sort of one of the birthplaces of research into the basic science of aging. And it's just sort of such a collaborative place that's always at the cutting edge of technologies, really always pushing out like very, very groundbreaking ideas about the biology of aging. For example, cellular senescence, which is one of the key hallmarks of aging, was really pioneered by the late Dr. Judy Campisi, who was a key faculty member here at Buck for the last 10, 15 years of her career. So that's just an example of the kind of work that's being done here. And it's a very exciting place to be studying aging.
So, Greg, I want to hand it off to you here. Obviously, I know you feel so strongly the Buck and the Buck Institute that you guys at Juvenescence are actually doing business with them. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about how Cognitive Switch got started and from the Juvenescence side? And then, I'll let you take it wherever you want with Brianna.
What you're really looking for is Brianna to fact check when I say whether it's actually on the honest.
I wasn't there when it was founded, so you probably have more information than me.
Yeah, I'd love to explore that, and also how you ended up at the Buck Institute. And a major shout out to Judith Campisi, who broke so many barriers. And so we went to the Buck Institute and they presented a number of projects, and one of them was this ketone ester. And some of the research was really profound. I think it was out of UC Davis, but Brianna can check me on that. That the mammals that were on the product in ketosis on a chronic basis lived 13.6% longer, and it had protective effects for heart and brain. And Dan Kelly had done a lot of work with the protection in the heart. And so we thought it was extraordinary. So Eric Verdin and John Newman, who are the two scientists, and Eric is also the president and I believe CEO as well of the Buck Institute, said they want to use it for heart failure. Heart failures are horrific clinical trials in phase 3 because you have to prove overall survival, which means you have to wait for people to die. And it's one thing if people are dying of an acute cancer, where it's 6 months a year, but with heart failure, it could take a really long time. So I said to Eric and John, I said, I love your product. I cannot, I would have I don't think we're not going to be able to do this cardiovascular trials that you're looking for. What I can do, if it's safe, like you say, I can probably get on the market in 2 or 3 years. And we can use it under a designation at the FDA called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And Brianna will explain how safe it is and where it fits in the body so that you really know it's safe. And they went away and thought about it. And I said, by the way, 75, whatever the number is, millions of people who have heart failure or have congenital heart disease, this is going to be a product that they can buy in 3 years, over on Amazon. And they went away and thought about it and agreed, and we licensed the drug. And then we had the pleasure of meeting Brianna, who is, as you said, one of the foremost experts in this. So A, you can edit what I just said, Bri, if you've heard a different version. And B, tell us how you ended up at the Buck and how you fit into the ketone ester story.
That's a pretty good summary. So I think to build on what Greg was saying, it's like there's a good 10 years or so where ketones kind of really were out of fashion in the mid 1900s. Actually, ketogenic diet has been used for over 100 years at this point to treat drug-resistant epilepsy. So it's not a new thing, the idea of ketosis and the idea of ketosis having a therapeutic potential. But it really took a hit with the Atkins diet. And so it really, people were not looking at it from a scientific perspective. And then sort of in the 60s, it started up again with people looking at starvation physiology. But it really, really started to ramp up after around about the year 2000 with people starting to be interested in how ketones could be used for health and for performance. Really, one of the seeds of that was in 2003, I believe, the US military, so through DARPA, funded a program that they called metabolic dominance. And it was around the time of the Iraq War. And the idea was that we wanted to find ways to fuel soldiers in battle more effectively than we were doing up to this point. And so that metabolic dominance program was what gave birth to and produced the first drinkable ketone. And that was a few years on down the line after they produced this first drinkable ketone. That's how I got involved. So I was researching this ketone drink from an athletic performance perspective. So we were trying to kind of mimic, one of the studies we were doing was sort of mimicking a mission that soldiers would be doing. So they were doing steady state exercise and solving cognitive problems. And then every hour they would do a more intense kind of bout as part of that. So we were interested in physical and cognitive performance under duress and in these sort of more extreme environments. And as all of this research was kicking off, and we also had these tools like drinkable ketones, like ketone esters, that would allow us to really just sort of replicate elements of the ketogenic diet without having to change your diet. So that's a big attraction because a lot of people don't want to change their diet, or it takes a bit of time for your body to adapt and kind of go into ketosis naturally. So we've got this new tool. It's being used for performance, but at the same time, people are starting to realize that ketones are doing more than just behaviors and energy in the body. And so around about the time that I was doing my PhD, John Newman and Eric Verdin over here at the Buck, although at the time they were at UCSF, were doing research into how ketones are what's called a signaling metabolite. So ketones have do things in the body that is more than just producing energy. They combine directly to receptors. They can modify how proteins are behaving. They can be metabolized into other things like neurotransmitters. You put your hand up.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Just because I didn't understand this when I first started learning stuff from Greg, can you explain to people how and why the body creates its own ketones, which is endogenous, and then what exogenous means, and then go back to exactly what you're saying? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. Like I'll do my best to explain this, and sorry for presuming that was already like a known thing. So if we look at, I think it's Greek. It's either Greek or Latin, but endo means from within, and genus means originating from. So endogenous means it's coming from within the body, as whereas exo is exoskeleton or outside, and so exogenous is coming from outside the body. So that's what those two words mean. And so the body, we humans probably wouldn't have evolved as we are now without the ability to endogenously make our own ketones, because our brain is a very, very metabolically hungry organ. It can use up to 25% of the energy that our body consumes in the day is being consumed in the brain. So, and the brain's obviously very important. Without it, we can't function. We would just, we would lie down on the ground. We wouldn't be able to kind of keep going. So being able to keep that really energy hungry brain going is like almost the primary concern of our body at any time. So, but back when we were evolving, and we were also evolving these bigger and bigger brains, there wasn't a 7-Eleven on every corner. Other grocery stores do exist, but there wasn't as easy access to food as there is now. And so when our ancestors, hunters and gatherers, were unable to like find some berries or find some honey or find food, then we needed a way to keep the brain going that wasn't relying on carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are really great energy, but we don't have a ton of them stored in our body. So depending on what you or I have eaten, we've probably got enough for 24, maybe 48 hours of not eating in terms of carbohydrates stored in our body. And so that's great, it keeps us going for a bit of time, but what happens when that starts to run out and then our brain energy is under threat? And so just as in an answer to that problem, our body evolved the ability to take our fat, which can't normally be used by our brain. So we have a lot of energy stored as fat, but fat isn't able to cross that blood-brain barrier. So the brain is nicely insulated. It's really tight control what goes in and out. And fat is one of those things that just can't very easily get into the brain and is not used as a fuel for our brain very much. And so what we did is we took the fat, we convert the fat into ketones, and that happens in our liver mainly. Although one very interesting thing that's coming out in the field now is that people are finding sites of ketone production on a small scale in other parts of the body, but we could talk about that later. That's more of like a frontiers and technical thing. But mainly fat goes to our liver, the liver converts the fat to ketones, and then ketones are these very small molecules, and they are able to cross into the blood-brain barrier. So that means in this setting where you don't have any carbohydrate left, but you do have some fat left, you can convert the fat into this energy that can go into the brain and keep the brain going. So that's why we produce ketones, and that's how we produce ketones. And so up until really, the early 2000s, it was not really appreciated that you could increase blood ketone concentrations any other way easily. So some scientists did it in the lab with an infusion. So instead of like an IV of salt, like you'd get if you were being rehydrated in the ER, you could plug someone into an IV that contained ketones, and that was used only in the research lab as a way to study metabolism. But obviously, you're not going to be putting an IV on an athlete and then sending them out to cycle in the Tour de France or anything, or an IV in a soldier and then sending them out into the battlefield. So it's not a very practical solution. And so it was really, as I said, with that program Metabolic Dominance in the early 2000s that really sparked the interest in putting ketones in something that you could just drink anywhere, anytime, whatever you'd been eating. You could be eating, and I don't advocate people doing this, but in theory, you could be eating a donut or a slice of pizza with one hand and drinking a ketone drink with the other hand, and you would still be having this increase in ketone bodies that would typically only be happening if you had been very, very restricted on your carbohydrate or even starving for days at a time. So the state of exogenous ketosis or fed ketosis is kind of a new thing that we've been exploring and trying to figure out how to leverage in the last 20 years.
And then one last thing, and I promise to hand it back to you, Greg. Can you explain the new exciting stuff about how you're feeling like this is interacting with the body, like why geroscientists are excited about this?
Oh yeah, this is my shtick, so I can talk about this forever. But as I said, ketones, mainly think of them as an energy. Everyone was just like, ketones are an energy for the brain. This is where that ends, and that even by itself is very interesting from an aging perspective, because one of the key hallmarks of aging and one of the features of most age-related diseases is that our mitochondria get less good at making energy. It's a really key feature of Alzheimer's disease.
Mitochondria,
the brain gets less good.
Do you want to explain?
Which hallmarks of aging?
Mitochondria.
Oh, okay. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's the little organelle or little piece inside the cell where our body makes energy. And so in Alzheimer's disease, those little powerhouses, they get less good at making energy from sugar. And so it's been shown that you can bypass that kind of blockage in energy production by feeding the mitochondria ketones instead. So that's, the dysregulated and breakdown in metabolism that happens with aging is one very pertinent and important way that ketones can work in aging. But for those of you that have been following aging a little bit, you might have heard of this term, the hallmarks of aging. And so this is like a set of, they're being updated all the time. I think at one point there was 9, there might be more of them now, but they're key features of things that change in our body and in our cells when we age. There are lists that all of the scientists have agreed upon, and they include things like that mitochondrial dysfunction. They include things like inflammation. They include things like changing in what's called epigenetics, so it's sort of gene expression, and the list kind of goes on like that with these kind of key conserved features. And it turns out that ketones aren't just an energy, that they can actually directly modulate some of these key hallmarks of aging that scientists are very interested in. And so they are kind of attacking the problem from a lot of different angles. They're an energy for the aging body, but they're also acting as this non-energy signal that can potentially, because it's sort of lightly touching on a number of pathways, sort of potentially help with health span and lifespan. And as Greg was mentioning when he described how the project kind of came to be, the observation that the ketogenic diet could extend health span, so physical and cognitive function during aging, which is quite frankly, for me, I would rather be healthy up until the age of 85 than live to 115 and have 20, 30 years where I'm less physically and cognitively able. So for me, I'm much more focused on the idea of health span versus lifespan. And I know that different scientists in the space kind of think about that differently, but so there's the ketogenic diet increasing lifespan and health span, but further sort of support for this idea came from the fact that caloric restriction and fasting, which are two states which make our body make its own ketones, those also extend health span and lifespan. And those are really almost the gold standard in the aging space for an dietary or lifestyle intervention that can extend the lifespan and health span of almost anything. You can extend the lifespan of your yeast and your C. elegans, which are worms. You can extend the lifespan of your mice. And then these, more time-consuming and expensive studies with non-human primates have also shown improvement in lifespan and health span. And so all of this kind of constellation of stuff coming together, the kind of clinical observations with improved energy production in some of these conditions of aging, the preclinical and animal and cell data showing these different signaling actions of ketones, all in all, this has made it like a very, very promising, very interesting area to be studying, with just so many different avenues for investigation. And so, when I joined the field, I was really only interested in ketones as if they were Gatorade. Like, can I drink this and will it power me for longer? But now, my career has evolved along with the research, and it sort of focuses on things that can have this very big impact on what I see as like the biggest problems that we have in society right now.
That's so great. Greg, what were you going to ask before I interrupted?
I know that you did historically the research on the military to try, or followed that research. And I believe you now are doing it again at Ohio State University. What is the end point? What are you looking at? And for our listeners, if they were to decide to embark upon this, do they take the drink or do they, drop to a 1,200 calorie diet?
I think the biggest disadvantage of achieving ketosis through diet is that it's just difficult to do. It takes a lot of planning. So if you're going to be on the ketogenic diet, absolutely a lot of people do this. And one thing I would recommend is that you get blood work done before and then, keep on top of your blood work, because it's one of those things where if you're not getting the right sources of fat in your diet, or depending on your own individual genetics, it can send things in a wonky direction. That's not to say it does that for everyone. For some people, there's no issues and they go ahead and they have a really great quality of life. They have improvement in some of the physical and cognitive parameters that they're looking for. So, try it, but with supervision. Then that sort of the low calorie approach, it's interesting. And there's a group of people, I'm trying to remember what they call themselves. I think it might be called like the Calorie Restriction Society or something, but they're people who have been doing caloric restriction for a very long time. And, again, it's doable, but it's not always pleasant. A lot of us, food is such an important part of our like social fabric of everything that we do that, I think I'd struggle and to do that long term. So it's more like a kind of convenience thing. Ketone drinks are nice because you can sort of deploy them at a time when you think that you need them without having to do any sort of other special preparation beforehand. So a number of teams on the Tour de France are using ketone drinks as part of their recovery strategy now, for example. Or if we are, another use case which I'm very interested in is how ketones might be used to help people, sports people, or even just people in the workplace recover from concussion. Because when you have a concussion, your brain energy is compromised and you get a lot of inflammation and a lot of damage happening in the brain. And ketones can provide an energy for the brain in that setting and may also help with some of those signals that relate to damage. And that's neat because, you would take that hit on the field and then you could come to the sidelines, you can go straight on a ketone drink, as whereas if you were going to go on a diet or calorie restrict, it's going to take quite a long time for your body to get into the state of ketone production. So that's, the major areas where I see an advantage of the drink. Definitely wouldn't discount dietary interventions, but for a lot of people, they're impractical and it takes that time to build up the natural production of ketones in the body.
Few people talk about mental acuity and that the ketones are helping with their mental acuity or energy for all the reasons you mentioned. Is it something many people feel? Yeah,
I mean, we're still... and the research is still kind of being done in that space. And I don't know how it's going to pan out because it's so hard to test cognition in healthy people because, we're all functioning at such a high level anyway. And there's so many confounding factors like stress and sleep. And it's really hard to run those studies. So I'm interested to see whether that gets done. So you mentioned the program of work that we have going on at The Ohio State, which is, again, funded in a big way by the US military. And there's a number of studies as part of that big program, but one of them is looking at ketones and cognitive performance in the context of sleep deprivation. So more often than not, when we want to look at cognition in healthy people, we have to stress them in some way. And in this study, we're sleep depriving them for 4 nights and testing their cognition. Sometimes this happens, some of these classic experiments get done in like medical school residents. So I don't know what your experience is of that, Greg, when like whether you'd have used some cognitive switch.
You don't have to enforce it, just have to put them on call.
Yeah, exactly.
Jess, what do you got on this topic?
Okay, this one's just more of a personal interest one. So I had like the metabolism of like a 14-year-old boy right up until my very late 30s.
Nice.
Okay? Like I could do 3 like heaping bowls of mid-chip ice cream and 5 root beers a day, no change. Okay, after dinner, and then one day I sneezed and gained 20 pounds, and my teenage daughter was wanting to get more serious on her health, and so she challenged me one day. Like we did this $40 bet. Whoever ate sugar first that month had to give the other one $40.
Oh wow!
And I dropped like 2 pant sizes in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't want to just gain it back. And so like, I didn't really do much research. I just like did the Tim Ferriss 4-hour body, low carb thing to just maintain. And it's been okay, but like, I've never been like super satisfied with it. And so since hanging out with Greg more and more, he's like influenced me to think a lot more about like the Valter Longo longevity diet. And so I'm researching it, and I am transitioning a bunch of things over. And like, I really feel like I'm in the education stage there. But so I just started this ketone ester, the cognitive switch that you guys work on last week. And I guess my question is like, any thoughts of like, if I do decide to go long-term taking this cognitive switch, but I am like pretty interested in this kind of like old school Mediterranean diet, you know, like the Walter Longo type longevity diet, and like the combination of the two, or what kind of things I should talk to my doctor about, or any thoughts there?
You should explain what cognitive switch is, Bri.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So I've talked a few times about drinkable ketones, right? So these are compounds that we make in the lab and now are made kind of at scale that contain either ketones themselves or things that are precursors to ketones that our body can really easily convert into ketones. So the idea there is that you drink it, your body, it goes in through your gut and it's absorbed really easily. Your body can break it down and convert it, and it's going to give you a sort of a gradual and sustained and then release of ketones in the blood that'll last sort of, depending on the individual, depending on how much you take, it can last anywhere between like 2 to 5 hours, again, depending on the individual and the serving size. So there are a number of different types of ketone drinks out there. They all work slightly differently in the body. And I'd like to shout out here that one of the other things that we're doing in the DoD funded program is running a study of 4 of the different compounds side by side, because we think that up until this point, the scientists and also companies, everyone's just kind of presumed that a ketone is a ketone is a ketone, and that they all behave the same, and that there's no reason to take one over the other. But we actually, you know, what I suspect is that the kind of delivery form of the ketone probably is going to have a functional difference. And so what we're doing is people come in and they take all of these 4 compounds on different visits, and they also do 2 doses as well. And we're measuring everything that we can think of about their metabolism and about their physiology. And the idea there is definitely not to develop like a ranking for one or the other. But what I actually think is that different ketones are going to be good for different use cases. So there'll be one that will be really well suited for heart failure, one that will be really well suited for brain metabolism, one that will be really well suited for athletic performance and recovery, and maybe one that's better for cognition as well. But until we understand if there are differences and what the differences are, we can't make any recommendations to people. So drinkable ketones, there's a lot of them. We think that they're probably behaving differently inside the body, but we don't know that yet. And we're doing the research to determine that. And so cognitive switch is one of those specific types of ketone drink. And the reason that cognitive switch was developed is to provide the body with the very, very powerful precursor to a ketone called a C8 fatty acid. And now that is very similar or almost identical to the thing that the body would normally take and make into ketones if you were on a ketogenic diet. And so by tapping into that natural ketone production, we think that it gets a step closer to being like the ketogenic diet, or being like making ketones during fasting, whereas some of the other compounds that are out there, they don't tap into that natural production pathway. They go into the body and break apart, and they're just ketones already. They're there and ready in the blood. But we think that requiring the body to convert that precursor into ketones might have some specific advantages. So the other things that I should really point out about cognitive switch is that I've been working in this field for 10 years and actually first got into it as a study participant. And ketone drinks, all of them to this point, have tasted pretty vile. The first time that I drank a ketone drink, it was like kind of a milkshake from space. It's like intensely bitter. It was just, you know, not that you kind of put it in your mouth and you're like, this shouldn't be in my mouth. Not good. And so the last 10 years or so, everyone's been working to try and fix this problem of taste, because obviously that affects how easy it is to take it every day. And I'm just so pleased to have been involved with the development of cognitive switch insofar as like, it tastes really good. It does not taste bad. It's not even just like less bad. It's actually in some forms quite delicious, or has no taste. So I think we've really made a step on with that, and just in terms of making ketone drinks much more acceptable to more people. I just trying to remember the exact question that you'd asked me, Greg. What is cognitive switch? I feel like I've talked enough about that. And then I was talking about it before then. Where was I going?
Answering Jess on what he should do and what our listeners should do. How they should use it.
Is there any conflict with not like the current Mediterranean, like Italy diet of pizza and all that stuff, but like the, traditional, like a lot of like high carbohydrate vegetables and stuff? Like, do you see any conflicts between?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Fish and vegetable and olive oil is the Mediterranean.
I think that, I think the headline is no with some caveats.
Okay.
I think that people who are more conservative than me might say that the state of having any carbs plus ketones is unusual and hasn't been seen before in human evolution. And that's true. However, all of the studies that we've done to date, and the longest study at this point is one we've just finished with cognitive switch that lasts 12 weeks, and we look at safety and we look at all of those things. And there's no reason there's no reason in the data so far to have any concerns about using ketones with a normal diet. But I would say that if you had ketones with a normal diet that was also in caloric excess, then you're putting more energy into your body than it needs, and that's likely going to end up with the same kind of negative consequences that would happen if you were adding sugar into your diet. Ketones are not very readily stored, so it's not like you're gonna, with carbs you might store some as glycogen. With fat, you're going to store it in your adipose tissue. With ketones, it's not stored. So once you consume it, it really has to be burned. So if you're taking it and then you're taking in way too much other energy as well, and more energy than you can store, then you possibly going to end up with some side effects that we haven't seen yet. But I wouldn't. There's no reason for concern. I wouldn't be doing it on top of the regular Western diet and assuming that was going to be fine.
If you had excess ketones, does it go out in the urine? Is it have to be metabolized? What happens to it? Because that speaks to its adverse effects.
Yeah. So the main fate is metabolism. So as long, we actually saw in some of the early studies that we did at the University of Oxford that if you gave people the same drink and made them cycle at 75% of their maximum intensity, 45% of their maximum intensity, or sit at rest, that directly affected the ketone concentrations that we got. So if you're doing more work, you burn it off faster, versus if you're sitting at rest, then it takes longer for it to burn off. So, we do think that metabolism and burning of the ketones is like a major fate. So if you don't go burn it off, it's just going to sit in your bloodstream for longer, which, may or may not be a bad thing. And you'd expect the same kind of thing if you were going to drink Gatorade and like a sugary drink. I think that I don't think that there's any concerns about having ketones on top of like a normal amount of carbohydrate.
And that speaks to the C8, by the way, which is the natural process. So in the same way that this is such a natural process, the cognitive switch, not speaking to the other ketones, is that it's exactly what the body does. So it's sitting in the blood should be less detrimental. Sorry, Jess, go ahead.
No, I think that's a really important point. So I'm so happy for you to take the Fifth Amendment on this one if you want. But I know, as you think about me and my friends who are much more interested in investing in preventative medicines and geroscience and longevity, and I have learned not to use the word anti-aging because apparently guys who used to use that were a bunch of like snake oil salesmen or just exaggerators. But thinking about this world, it can be so confusing for outsiders, right? And like what I've mostly done is like try to find people who I feel like I can trust their judgment. Hence the reason I hang out with Greg all the time.
Yeah.
Because I could, 40 years, starting as a medical doctor all those years ago, 20 years of biotech investing. And there's this aspect of like, okay, is the science right? And then are these the kind of people who can get it through regulatory? And then if they can get it through regulatory, if it needs it, can they actually build a company? Like, can they make this thing profitable? And those can be, in my understanding, those can be pretty distinct skill sets.
Totally.
From the scientific breakthrough to drug development to, I guess a lot of the monetization is often through being acquired by a big drug company or something like that. But like in the case of something like this, maybe you don't, it's not a pharmaceutical. Now you have to market it and you worry that people are going to slip into like the snake oil salesman exaggerators. Anyways, I'm just interested in your thoughts for like investors outside of biotech who are thinking maybe this is what they want to do with some of their money going forward. Just what kind of thoughts or ups or downs you think they should anticipate or how to do it smartly?
Gosh, where to begin? I guess I'd echo hopefully what a lot of your listeners are already, aware of, which is that this space, it's here to stay. There's a lot of growth in this space, a lot of new companies, a lot of new technologies. There's a lot, I'm seeing a lot of people coming with digital solutions, and if you're interested in being in this space, it doesn't necessarily have to be through helping to make a drug. There are a lot of other ways, but I think that if people need further encouragement to kind of bet into this space, it's just, we have a massively aging population. We're, generally not continuing to get healthier. The burden of diseases of aging is only going to increase as more and more of us get older. And, so it's, I think that this is probably one of the most important issues facing our society now. So I'd encourage people to engage with it in any way that they feel comfortable. I like your approach of finding a trusted advisor to kind of help you get going. It is hard when there's so much conflicting information out there. And if anything, it would probably be slightly easier in some ways to go into a drug space than a supplement or a lifestyle adjacent business space, because when there's no regulation, then it's hard because people can say whatever they want. So trusted advisors, do as much homework as you can. But I think, an experienced scientist is always going to be excited about their work and may well oversell it. So you do need, and within science itself, we have the process of peer review and we have the process of, academic discourse at conferences and meetings and things like that. So if I wanted to gut check someone else's science work, I'd probably go find someone else who's publishing in the space, some other peer of that person, and ask them for their opinion. Because I think that would be, although academics are normally pretty busy, if they don't like someone else's work, they're going to give you an honest opinion. So that would maybe be my little, tip or nugget for someone who wants another academic's opinion on someone else's work to figure out whether the scientist is, overselling what they've worked on.
Yeah. Greg, I want to ask you the same question. You've been a part of these multi-billion-dollar success stories, whether it's been an investor, financier, CEO times, these different aspects of biotech investing for 20 plus years. What would you add to what Brianna just said?
Trusted advisors, both of you said. Also, checking with two people. So because of exactly what Brianna said, some people oversell. They're so passionate about what they're doing. Some people are disingenuous, but some people it's just passion for their project. And so when I get a tip like, actually, I think I got it from John Lithgow at the Buck. I think he talked about low-dose lithium having an anti-aging effect. Now, was this just something spurious he saw, or was it just some early thing he was excited about? I then checked it at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital with Dr. Paul Shields, and he said, yes, I see that actually in my kidney patients, that the low-dose lithium seems to have a profound effect. So I think if you can begin to balance out, finding two reputable people, independent, who are not, selling you something, is very helpful. But it is really difficult, and it's so hard as a company to rise above the wad of, this agglomeration of people overhyping. Like, how do I differentiate myself from them? And, the corporation's really difficult because you have to build credibility and trust. So it's a very tricky thing to build so that, because people don't have access to John Lithgow or Paul Shields like I had to vet a potential project. But when I then espouse it, or Peter Attia, who has vetted it by multiple people, you can begin to trust that, Peter didn't just take the first person who said this works. If he's looking at rapamycin, he asked 10 people.
Yeah. Due diligence is so key, right? Bri, this has been so fun to have you. I feel like I've only got somewhere between 4 to 6 hours more questions. So if you don't have much going on, we're going to have to do more calls.
More? Absolutely.
Go ahead, Greg.
Brianna, and again, you played the fifth. What do you take as a scientist, a knowledgeable person? What is your regimen as far as supplements and lifestyle?
Okay. Well, I think I do. I think as an athlete and now as a, as a professional athlete and now as an athlete, but a less professional athlete, you absolutely have to do the basics right before you add supplements or any other like little things on top. So, for me, the cornerstones of performance and feeling good and, being healthy have always been sleep, a good, well-balanced diet and exercise. So you have to do those three things well. Otherwise, it's not worth even starting to add other things in. I've always enjoyed using different trackers to kind of monitor my own like biomarkers, and I find that that's a really useful reinforcing tool to build healthy habits and sort of stay on top of them if you start to fall off track. Because just I think people get really easily derailed if you have one bad day or a bad week or however long. But the superpower is being able to kind of get yourself back on track every time that you deviate. So for me, tracking has helped with that. And then in terms of once I've done those things well and I'm tracking my performance, I try and stay on top of taking vitamin D and fish oil, and I take magnesium before I go to bed. So that's sort of my more like regular supplements. And then, I will of course use cognitive switch from time to time, especially when I'm like in a big heavy training block, or if I'm for me, it's like a replacement for an afternoon extra cup of coffee. I'm a big green tea drinker as well, but it's green tea or cognitive switch for me in the afternoons.
That's so fun. If people want to follow you more, by the way, I really liked the article you posted on Twitter back in January. But if people want to follow you more, is LinkedIn a good place? Where are the best places to either reach out or follow you or things like that?
Sure. I do keep on top of checking LinkedIn messages, so that's a great place to reach me. And then the same on Twitter as well. I'm there and lurking, depending on my appetite for engaging in that like kind of cesspool. But if people come at me with productive questions, I always have time to respond.
Okay. Greg, what do you want for a final question here today?
No, that was mine. I was interested to hear about the supplements because I think that, again, the listeners, that's what you've got one of the foremost experts. What are they doing and when are they doing it?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't take cognitive switch every day?
I just never really had access to it like I have had recently. So it's just, I don't drink coffee every day. I'm not necessarily a religious doing things like that every day kind of person. For me, it feels better to use it as as needed additional boost.
But a lot of the research is about chronic ketosis.
Well, John Newman's paper looking at ketogenic diet and lifestyle was cyclical. That was 5 days on and time off. And I feel a bit like, for me, this might change as I age, because at the moment I'm still in my early 30s and still pretty metabolically flexible and fit and all of those things. So, I'm kind of more of a, it just chimes more with me. The idea, there's this idea called hormesis, which is like you stress the body and then it recovers a little bit. And so I kind of like the idea that, everything that I'm doing, whether it's, exercise, that's like a stressor on my body, and then I recover with sleep, and then cognitive switch, it's like pushing my body, not a stressor, but, you're making your metabolism and your body kind of flex and bend within a kind of confined, safe region, because you're building resistance as you move your body through those different states. So for me,
over to you, Jess. Last question.
With where I am, that's where I do. Yeah.
Okay. I know we're about up for time, so I would just say this: there's so many people that I respect that have a lot of respect for you. Besides being a world champion rower and a top triathlete, all these things, there's so many people that would like to have accomplished the kind of things you have that haven't. What do you think is different about you? What do you think you do different?
Sometimes when people ask me this, I say that I've been very lucky. I've had good mentors, I've worked on good projects, and there's definitely a big element of I've been in the right place at the right time. But in order to kind of convert those opportunities, I've had to be disciplined and hardworking and smart enough to be able to convert those things as they've kind of come to me. I had the opportunity to move to San Francisco to work on a startup on ketones after my PhD. And that was very much a case of timing, but also a case of having built the expertise and the ability to be able to do that. So I think, for people who are looking to build accomplishments in their own life, it's follow things that you're interested in and passionate about and can build expertise and confidence in. I think one of the biggest things that's helped me is being collaborative and seeing value in working with other people compared with other people who I've worked with who are very like lone wolves and won't share their ideas, won't share their achievements. And so for me, even rowing, triathlon's not a team sport, but rowing was always a crew sport. And so the ability to get the best out of other people in your team. And I do think that was one of the things that set me apart as an athlete. I was physically gifted, but when you get to that level, everyone's pretty physically gifted, but I was really, really good. We would do this type of selection where you would row with all of the different people on the team, and then you'd get like a combined time for you with everyone else. And I was really, really good at getting into the boat with someone new who I'd just been racing against and like bringing together like as a crew, getting the most that you can out of that person on that run, adapting with people to fit around people. So I think that that's an important skill where, that other people perhaps focus so much on themselves that you're never going to get to where you want to get to unless you can bring people along for the journey and build a good team around you. So that's very important as well.
Yeah. I get a lot of high performance on the show, Delta Force, pro athletes who've been through injuries. And I'm interested what you tell yourself in the hard times or like when stuff sucks. Like what's your version of helping you get through the hard parts?
Gosh. I used to have had a mantra, but I think now when I'm in a time that's difficult, I don't let myself ruminate or think about why things are difficult. I'm just looking for like solutions and next steps and things that I can do to move out of that. It's like, is it worth me spending any time being upset about this? Is me being upset about this going to make any difference to this situation? No. Well, then we're not going to do that. We're going to, move on to why did we get in this situation so we don't have to do it again? Or what are we going to do to move on past this? So I think now if I'm in a time that really sucks, last week I got dropped a very, very last minute grant, like $40 million we're writing for, and we're going to do it in 10 days. And typically you would do that over like 6 to 8 weeks, like crazy. And I was just like, I just laughed. I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to sit and start writing, and this is going to be kind of a sucky 10 days, but we'll just get on with it. So there's, when you're in a time like that, you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So I think that would be how I would distill that down. Don't stop. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other, because life's going to continue to move and you're on the train. So got to keep riding it.
Very practical and very stoic of you. Hey, this has been so much fun. Thanks for making the time to do it.
Thank you. It's good to meet you, Jess.
Okay. Bye, everyone.